Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, the Flashlight, Floodlight, and Juggler, Training Attention with Meditation, happened on February 17th, 2025, as a science and spirituality dialogue with contemplative neuroscientists David R. Vago and Amishi Ja, Dzogchen Master Geshe Tenzin Wangyal, and host Alejandro Chaoul-Reich. This was part of a year-long series, Bring Body, Speech, and Mind to Life. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome, everyone, to Cyber Sangha. My name is Alejandro Chaoul. I'm delighted to be hosting another of these dialogues of science and spirituality. And this is the last one of this series of body, speech, and mind. And so, of course, it's about mind, and it's about training attention with meditation. So before I introduce the speakers, I also want to say that tomorrow Rinpoche will have a teaching on realizing your full potential, manifesting qualities that benefit others. And that's at 11 a.m. New York time, so an hour earlier than now. And what I wanted to say is I want to start with Rinpoche because he's really the creator of Cyber Sangha, and really he started this way before COVID. So he realized the importance of bringing dialogues, teachings for free in this broad space that we can be wherever we are. And I know that there's people probably in all 5 continents. And it's great to have that. And Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche is a Tibetan master, a Lama, who trained in Menri Monastery in India. And then in 1986, when he graduated with his Geshe degree, traveled with his teacher, Yongzin Tenzin Namdag. Many of you know him. He's 97 years old now. He's in Nepal, Chitanobutse. And Rinpoche trained under him. He was kind of both. Lopun was kind of his father, his teacher, and he learned so much from him. And he brought that to the West with that warmth and started really understanding our Western mind. And so he, from my perspective, and I'm a little biased, I've been his student for 30 years. But he is, a brilliant Lama person, communicator, and creator of all these forums. So Rinpoche, thank you and welcome again. And joining us today, 2 wonderful people that I have the pleasure of knowing for a number of years. And so I'll start with Amishi. So Amishi Ja is the director of contemplative neuroscience and professor of psychology at the University of Miami. And previously, she served as an assistant professor at the Center of Cognitive Neuroscience at UPenn. Her background is both in biological psychology as well as cognitive neuroscience. And she's been really working, her main work you can see, and we'll talk more about working with DoD, with the U.S. Department of Defense, and really bringing mindfulness-based trainings and cognitive, emotion, resilience, and performance. She also brings this in other areas such as education and corporate and elite sports, first responders, and as I was saying, in the military context. And she uses a lot of different tools for this in her lab in University of Miami, from MRI and EEG, and she'll talk maybe more about that and her research. And really interesting, she launched the first ever study of offering mindfulness training tools to active duty military service members as they prepare for deployment. You may know her book, Peak Mind, And if you don't, I'll recommend it. And we'll talk about some of the areas from there. And you can also see her in TED Talks and so forth. So, Amishi, welcome. Great to have you. And Dave, always good to see you. You've been in some of these dialogues before, both in person and online. So it's always great to have you. And I'll do some updates on that I see in your bio. So now he's a visiting faculty at the Contemplative Science Center at the University of Virginia and a research associate in psychiatry at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Harvard Medical School. He also is a research lead for the holistic well-being company Round Glass. Maybe we'll talk some about that. We haven't before, where he and his team are building analytical tools for tracking health and well-being outcomes, something that I know Rinpoche will be quite interested in. And Dave serves in a number of advisory boards and acts for as a consultant for mindfulness, well-being, and psychedelic research and in industry communities as well. He's the director of neuroscience for International Society of Contemplative Research, a new research institution that just started. Actually, you just had your first conference, and so maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. And he was before associate professor at Vanderbilt, the medical school, and the Vanderbilt Brain Institute. Both of them actually are part of the Mind and Life Institute, and actually I think those were the forums where I met you both originally almost a decade ago. So welcome, Dave. Always good to have you. So I wanted to start, as I like to do many times, with a little bit of a personal information so people that don't know you get to know you not just as a researcher and as a practitioner, but also as a person. So Amishi, I'd like to start with you. I'd like to start, if you can tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you into this specific area of research, of interest, and yeah, we'll leave it there for now.
Yeah. Well, it's so great to be together, and wonderful to finally meet you, Rinpoche. It's a great honor and an opportunity, and of course, my dear friends Ale and Dave too, to be together, and the community that is all here. And I really just want to honor the foresight that Rinpoche had regarding a cyber community. The fact that we can have a cyber community whose intention is this, to have these kind of conversations, I just feel so fortunate to have this chance to share with all of you. In terms of my own background, I am, I want to give you a journey that is both personal and professional, because these yoked up together that actually are confluence of why I'm here with you. On the personal side, initially in my early days, I thought I was going to be a medical doctor, and realized that there was no way I could probably spend my life in a hospital. It's not a gift I have. I just did not feel comfortable in that environment. But I was very fortunate that I ended up volunteering in a brain injury unit. And I was able to spend time with somebody who I thought, many patients, but one in particular stood out, somebody who I thought was a quadriplegic. And he had been in a terrible motorcycle accident. But what I learned through my time volunteering is that he was able to train his own brain through the physical therapies he had and the kind of internal practice he was doing on his own in the evening to actually regain functioning in his finger, to be able to start moving a lever so that he could power his own wheelchair. And to me, this was a really exciting thing to see somebody do firsthand. That got me hooked. I was fascinated by the brain at that point. I knew I wanted to study the brain. And in particular, I was interested in studying something that would really help to modulate what this entire organ does, right? So not only its capacity to change itself, but really its capacity to be changed through its own action. And that's sort of how I ended up studying this topic that I'm excited to anchor our conversation around: attention. And a lot of the years of my lab, early years of my lab at the University of Pennsylvania, were spent just understanding how this brain system works. How is it, and we still are on that journey, I mean, not to say that it's over, but how is it that there are main systems in the brain? What brain networks are involved? How does it function? What we started realizing, though, in the lab is that you could actually very easily see how powerful attention is. And to the point where I got to the understanding that this is the brain's boss, because wherever it is that we direct our attention, it recalibrates essentially what the entirety of the brain is biased toward. And that means it's a very, very powerful influence where we pay attention. But that, though it's powerful, in the lab, we could do these very contrived experiments where you could mess up attention. So give people negative stimuli that they have to try to deal with as distractors that come in while they're doing an attentionally demanding task, or something that was a pressure or a threat to their performance where they're going to be evaluated harshly. In some sense, where we're stressing them out arbitrarily and artificially in the lab. And under those circumstances, attention started falling apart. And so I was really in this kind of moment where I realized from my own research enterprise that this is bad news. So if it's the boss and the boss falls apart under these very known conditions, that's going to put some people in particular jeopardy. And this was right around the time that 9/11 had just happened in the United States. And we had service members who were on this multi-tour deployment cycle. And there was an episode really close to where I lived where somebody had gone into a school and shot some children. And at that point, they thought this was a service member who had come back, that it was a veteran from a recent encounter. We found out later that that was not the case. But anyway, it just got me thinking, we're in this context as a nation at that point where we're putting people through very, very demanding, grueling circumstances. The country's decided we have an army and our army's going to do this thing. Are we seeding our society with people that are going to be prone to psychological illness because of this? And I could not help but think that we're putting them in these circumstances that are exactly the kinds of things that our laboratory had been contriving artificially. So what do you do when there are professionals that are going to experience stress, threat, negative mood, evaluation? But it's not that they can afford to let their performance fall apart. They need to be at their very best. And when they aren't at their very best, deadly mistakes can happen. So it's either whether it's service members or first responders or even medical and nursing professionals, as we saw during COVID, it was a big puzzle to me. So professionally, my interest was just how do you get people to receive training that might protect their attention? And that's how mindfulness actually entered my lab's research as a tool, a brain training possibility that might be able to actually protect attention for people that cannot lapse, that cannot afford dysfunction. And that's pretty much been the route that my research program pivoted. But that's what sort of excites me these days, is to try to find practical solutions for people that are on the front lines in many ways, whether it's in our healthcare system or in other contexts.
Thank you, Amishi. Dave, if you want to say what brought you to also to this part, and particularly, I know you're a brain mapper, and but you've also done so many other things. So whatever you want to share at this part of where you are now.
Sure, I can just say a few things. One of the things that I want to echo Amishi's sentiments about being together. I've known Amishi and you, Ale, for quite some time. I think it was probably my first time at a Mind and Life Summer Research Institute was 2005. Amishi, I believe you were there. So I've known you for so long in this field, and this field has come such a long way where no one was really studying meditation in the neurosciences in the early 2000s. And it was really kind of a taboo field that started really in the 70s and then kind of petered out and started to reemerge only when Buddhist scholars like Rinpoche and His Holiness the Dalai Lama started getting interest in talking again about mind and the epistemology of how we understand the mind. And so I think we've all been sort of carried away with this this new field that's been emerging, contemplative science, where it's really a focus on how we understand the mind. So it's been really just a pleasure to be involved from really early on, because my own interest has been not only in cognitive neuroscience of how the mind functions, but as a practitioner, I've been practicing for about 25 years, started with the Goenka style Vipassana meditation. And I only in 2005 did I start to see the opportunity to start thinking about how my own personal practice could converge with my interest in studying the mind from a third person perspective using this tools of neuroscience. And there was a lot of people interested in that. And that field has now grown so much that there are degrees. There's about 40 graduate programs now that focus on either positive psychology or mindfulness specifically. So it's amazing how this field has developed. And we just, Ale, you mentioned that there's a new society, the International Society for Contemplative Research, and that sort of emerged from our relationship with the Mind and Life Institute that has been fostering these dialogues. And I'll say that there's now an emphasis also in trying to understand how psychedelics even are entering into the equation of how we understand the mind, and how it can be, how in an exploration of the mind, an inner exploration of the mind can help us in a therapeutic context. So not just in a real interest in how the mind works, but how are these practices, by turning inwards and expanding the mind in different ways through maybe pharmacological means, can help us with all the suffering that's happening right in the world right now. So I think Amishi was alluding to that as well. There's a lot of people who are really just looking for, how do we use these practices in a practical way that can help ease the suffering. And so that is also a really great interest of mine. And I think this will be a great way to sort of help our listeners to better understand not only what contemplative practice can do to train our attention and to hone in on different aspects of attention that we don't often think about, but how can it be used in a really practical way. So I think that I'll just leave it at that. And it's really a pleasure to be here again with you, Rinpoche, and Ale and Amishi. Just really a pleasure to engage with you in dialogue.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. And you both point out very important things about suffering, right? And about protecting, how mindfulness can be a way of protecting our attention and why it's important. And even the area of psychedelics, which we have touched with Rinpoche in dialogues with Bessel van der Kolk and Yves Ekman, and lately actually in one of the dialogues that was not part of this, but Rinpoche was in Blue Spirit last week and in dialogue with Gabor Mate. So a lot of interesting things. So Rinpoche, what do you want to share from your perspective as a monk first, and then a lama, and then, being long time trained in these practices, but you're also interested in this field, as Dave was saying, this field that emerged in the interest of trying to see it from a different perspective than what you learned necessarily in the monastery. And, in addition, how, all these machines that we are, looking and to see the mind, I'm going to say mind and not just brain for now, but also even the brain, and how, for example, the interest in these dialogues and including things like psychedelics. So I know it's a big chunk, but whatever you want to take of it.
So first of all, welcome Amishi, sorry, and Dave, and wonderful to have you both here. So our topic is kind of to do with more attention and focus, right? So this is our primarily topic. So I wanted to maybe not talk as an experience as a monk or a teacher, but as a father, and particularly Amishi mentioning that, how pressure can actually, you tend to lose your attention. So nowadays in the modern society, but everybody, but particularly teenage, and their younger kids, their attentions, it's very short and very distorted. And so this has been discussion with our teenage, saying, okay, you needed to focus more. You needed to focus more. So focus has been very important part of trying to advise. When you tell somebody to focus too much, then they lose the focus. So it's like this sense of pressure, that pressure is always about how to say, oh, you're doing really great, but you can do really better. And what about you can do these and these things, then that will be wonderful. Rather than saying you are, what you just did was wrong, you did not do good enough, or kind of going into the negative side of the and particularly bringing up idea of you're not focused enough. It's a very natural for tendency to parents to say those things, but I'm very, very aware of that. It makes me very conscious of that, so that how you bring how you support one child, or how you support whole school, how you support whole nation, whole profession. So I think it's important, but I'm interested a little bit more at the idea of attention and focus, which traditionally, every spiritual tradition, from Sutra to Tantra to Dzogchen to many other traditions, the attention and focus is very important part of the early development of any deeper contemplative tradition. So always there's a discussion about focus attention and open attention, for example. We can call it shine or hangtong, idea of focusing attention on object and non-focusing attention on your being. So as a person, I can say I'm pretty focused, but there's something that I'm not focused. So I would easily, in our family, my wife, she's more detail oriented, definitely. And I would probably wear somebody else's socks, for example, not even thinking whose socks is socks just happen to be there. As long as it's the same color, I will wear different socks also. I would not wear white and black together, but I'm not good at putting attention to those very specific details. But I have a lot of attention to focus on a bigger picture of whole where the things are going, what can be done, what is important to be done, how it can be done. So bigger picture, no attention to my socks, but I'm doing. So that, I think that kind of, I know it's a little bit funny to talk about success and that, but I think it does say something very important. Many times we talk a lot about attention to what we do, but not attention so much to what you feel or what you're thinking or who you are. And these are, I think, very key important discussions, that being more aware of yourself and your feelings and your thoughts and your intention, what you're trying to do, rather than just being only aware of when you're doing something, or very often people are aware of what they have done. I should have not said that. I should have not done that. I shouldn't, all those things afterward, right? So that I think the focus areas are very different. So I think it would be good to talk about these issues.
Thank you, Rinpoche. I mean, bringing it to the personal is so important. So I really, really appreciate that. And I'm sure both Dave and Amishi, I could see in their faces, but I think the audience does too. And I think this part of attention, so I'm going to go back to you, Amishi, and think about attention in both ways, I guess in the professional and the personal, and again, I think what Rinpoche pointed out, these parts of, there are parts that it's, maybe I don't need to, put effort in. Are the socks the same or not? Maybe that's not an area where I need to put attention, but maybe there are other areas where
Alex,
they can.
we both agree, but our wives will not agree with that.
That is true. That is very true. But at least for the context of this dialogue, we're going to say that. And I wanted to ask you, Amishi, to talk a little bit about these three areas or subcategories that you mentioned on attention. And I want to say for the audience, Rinpoche mentioned Shine and Laktong. So maybe a lot of people know it more as Shamatha and Vipassana. So just to let you know, or focused attention and open monitoring. So there's different ways that people know these concepts. So just to to be aware. And again, and you use metaphors for this, Amishi, like the flashlight, the floodlight, the juggler. And I wanted to add a question that came from the audience, because this might also bring it to a practical. And this is someone who works with heavy equipment operation, and that they can be very dangerous. And so how attention can support in those operations where he works. So
maybe just talk more broadly about these three metaphors, because I do think they relate to some of the topics that Rinpoche was just describing. So in the biggest sense, just because we're using this word attention to say what I mean when I use that term, because we could be thinking about different things. In the most broad sense, attention is privileging some information over other information. Mm-hmm. And the three metaphors are really just different ways we can think about how information is privileged or prioritized. So this flashlight idea, which is formally, we could call it selection or the brain's orienting system when we're talking about the external environment, is about, it really is like a flashlight or a torch, depending on the part of the world that you're in, right? So wherever we direct this computational resource of the mind, we can select based on content. So the very first way we talk about attention is, because it's prioritizing some information over other information, is let's prioritize based on the content. So right now, my flashlight is here looking at your beautiful faces, and everything else around me is sort of fuzzed out. And that is the role of attention when it prioritizes. It gives privileged access, granular access, and we see this at the earliest stages of information processing when we index brain function. But there's a couple of things that are important to think about. The first is that though we can think about it as a flashlight, just like in a darkened room or let's say we're on a darkened path walking, flashlight is such a handy tool. Wherever we direct it, we can make sure we don't trip or fall or etc. We're deciding how to hold that flashlight. So in some sense, Rinpoche, as you were saying, for you, that flashlight is held on certain things that for others may not be. You're not pointing the flashlight toward the exact match of your socks, which is fine. But here's the other important thing to keep in mind, which goes to your comment about attention spans may be decreasing, because it's actually not the case that attention spans are decreasing. We may feel that our children aren't able to pay attention, but attention spans, when you actually index them using various tasks, have been the same, at least for the last 50 years that we've had modern attention indices. And so the experience of people having shorter attention spans is driven by something else. And that has to do, I think, with this flashlight. So though you're walking down a darkened path and you can direct that flashlight willfully, if you hear a strange sound or something that sounds like an animal, you're going to take that flashlight and you're going to have it be pulled by wherever you thought that information is coming from. So in some sense, that is voluntary attention and then automatic capture of attention. And oftentimes in our modern world, there are so many more sources of capturing attention in the external environment. And it's not by chance. I mean, these are by design. So if we think about what the attention economy is, social media platforms, our technology is all designed to capture our attention. If in the middle of this conversation, I got a text message from my child and it started buzzing in a certain way, I would say, sorry, I've got to go. I'm going to deal with this important text, right? So the reason it often feels like attention spans are decreasing is because the pressure to yank it away, if you will, is more prevalent in our society. But even if you don't have external distractors, I think a lot of the reasons, if we think back to contemplative history and the beginning of the world's contemplative traditions, whether it be from the West or the East, the longing for the ability to have a better hold of our flashlight comes because even if we're in a darkened cave alone, the sources of distraction are still present because they're generated within our own mind. So one of the interesting things about this flashlight metaphor is that we can direct externally and we may be able to direct internally to highlight some aspects of what we generate as mental content, what we remember, and then what arises in our own mind that may capture us, that may or may not be helpful. So anyway, that's the way that I think about why the flashlight metaphor is so helpful in understanding this aspect of attention. But it's not the only way we pay attention. So there's two other systems of attention that I think are very important to kind of round out our understanding, and probably even a fourth that I'm excited to talk to Dave about. So the second way we can think about attention is not like a flashlight, but almost the exact opposite, this floodlight metaphor. And this is where we are not privileging content, like where we're directing a flashlight, but we're actually privileging the moment, now. And formally, this floodlight metaphor relates to something called the alerting system. So what is happening right now, essentially, that is most relevant for what I might need to take action regarding? So if you're driving down the road and you see maybe not a floodlight, but a flashing yellow light, right, near a construction site or a school zone, or what does that mean in that moment? It's not about flashing, pointing the flashlight. It's like, stay broad, receptive, and pay attention to what's happening right now. In fact, it would be unwise to narrow in that moment. Very different way of making the mind. And as we were talking about a moment ago with shamatha vipassana and the other terms for focused attention, open monitoring practices, we can see how they align to both of those different ways of orienting, of selecting our attention, of prioritizing information. So content, and then the moment for alerting. And then the third way to think about how we prioritize some information over other information is to think about it from the point of view of our goals. What is it that we want to be doing right now? And that is a system formally called executive control. I use this metaphor of a juggler. It's like the executive of any company. You're trying to keep all the balls in the air, making sure everything that your goals are saying you should be doing and your actions are aligned. So, and when there's a mismatch, to course correct. So you should be able to hold the goal in mind. That's the maintenance function. You should be able to inhibit inappropriate action when it doesn't align with the goal. And you should be able to flexibly change the goal if that's needed. So these are just three ways that we can think about this broad term of attention and what it prioritizes. What I think will be fun for our discussion is the fourth aspect of what we privilege or prioritize, not on content or moment or goal, but maybe the mind itself. So what happens when the focus of attention is the mind, and potentially even is our attention? And how does that advance our understanding of what we're doing and what we're capable of doing, whether it comes from our ethical code or what we consider to be who we are in some sense, what we value, what we think is the right way to treat other people. And then at the practical level, what we're thinking, feeling, and how we connect to others. So I hope that sort of helps in a broad sense of what these systems are.
Great. Yeah. Dave, did you want to respond to that?
Maybe just a quick response. I love how you articulate those metaphors. Amishi, they're super helpful in trying to understand how we think about attention. And it reminds me of how William James talked about it originally, right? In 1890, he talked about how everyone knows what attention is. But the point that he said, though, what makes me think about what you were saying is that he said is that it's the taking possession of the mind. And he went on to say, in a clear and vivid form of one out of what seemed like several simultaneous objects or trains of thought that are competing, right? But that taking possession of the mind, why is it that we preference one thing over another, right? In our awareness. And this is where it might be interesting to also ask Rinpoche about how from Buddhist point of view, attention and awareness differ, because sometimes we use those words interchangeably. And just to add to that sort of discussion or that framework that you provided, Amishi, if we could maybe clarify what we mean there when we talk about awareness versus attention, because we know that there's been great research that's been done for visual pop out and different ways of measuring attention, that we could have attention to objects in our field of view without actually having awareness of them, right? So they may be actually things in our environment may be influencing us and our behaviors without even knowing that they're influencing us. We're biased in certain ways towards something that's negative or something that we want to avoid in the world. But only some things get the possession of the mind, so we're aware of it. So I'm just wondering, maybe
really nice,
Rinpoche, you can also clarify what this difference is, because we often are confused by what we mean by attention and awareness, and because we talk a lot about awareness in the context of Buddhist meditation practice, right? So is there a way that you can maybe articulate the differences between, say, the initial contact with an object that may not have conscious awareness? And then at what point is there sort of a more relevance to bringing it into awareness to manipulate the information so we can do something with it, set goals and guide our behaviors?
Thank you, Dave. So yeah, very excited about the conversation. I think it's very, very interesting, fascinating. So from Buddhist perspective, I think when you're putting attention on something, not necessarily you're aware of that. When you are aware of something, more likely you're also putting attention on something. So I think that's kind of general clarification. I don't know if it makes sense.
Can you say it again? When you're paying,
when you're focusing, when you're putting attention on something, not necessarily you are aware of that something. But when you are aware of something, more likely your attention is also there. Most likely your attention is also there, okay? So that's general. So I wanted to just go back something in our tradition. We do practices, I call it fivefold teaching of Dao Jansen. And actually, in fact, I did a whole book on that. It's called the Awakening the Luminous Mind. So idea is there's a 5 lines in that text. It says vision is mind. Vision means everything what your outer vision experiences, whatever you're focusing on, it's your mind. That means in that first step of meditation, your attention is on the object. So you can say a problematic person. So I'm focusing on a problematic person. I'm focusing on a problem. I'm focusing on my pain. I'm focusing on my conflict. I'm focusing on what is not working. So you can go on focusing on something not good for you, but you cannot help not to focus on that. That's how you're built. So then in this practice, what you're trying to do is you're saying vision is mind. So that it's your mind. It's not bad. You're seeing it's bad. So your attention is very much on object. You're trying to work, meditate, and then some point you're able to clear that object is not bad. You're seeing the object is bad. You're able to distinguish that. Then you have more peace with the environment. So then the second question is, what is a mind? Then it says mind is empty. So your attention is not on the object. Attention is on the subject, which was focusing on an object and creating a lot of stories. So now it goes back to the mind, my mind. What is my mind? So I'm looking at my mind. I'm putting attention at my mind, like a camera lens. I'm going closer, and then at some point it gets so close I cannot see any images anymore because I see only pixels. It's the dot of light. That's all I see. I don't see any stories, pain, anything. I just see a dot of light. My mind is like empty and luminous. And then I'm done with my job of focus at putting my attention back to my mind. I accomplished that. Now I'm aware of my mind. Then it goes 3 more steps. I don't want to go into that. The first 2 attention is one, it's on object. And the first is on object because that's what you created, the story. Second attention is the one who is creating the story. So I think that's a very, very important part, how we upgrade our attentions and prioritize our attention to go more introverted, more subtler, more impersonal attention. So that the value is like the value is not going outward, extroverting, materializing, conflicting stories. It's not the way we value or prioritize our attention. So just want to make one more comment about Amishi. I completely agree with you. The idea of attention is not, when I was saying is exactly what you're saying is that the prioritizing what is the most priority at that moment seems like sometimes we don't have not clear priority of what attention should be put. Then there's too many things happening at the same time. You are putting so many attention to so many things, even it's not important, but it's like a lack of focus. Yeah. Like teenage kids, they can play a game for 10 hours with amazing attention, but they cannot pay attention. I just wrote a little reflection of my everyday life. Every day I write something. I said something, attention is something, but a few days ago. So So when you are able to put attention on something that you like, it's a common gift. Everybody can do that. Every addicted people can do that. Everybody can do that. Ability to focus on something that you don't like, but need it for your growth is harder. It requires more discipline. So both are attention, but sometimes people cannot put where they should put attention, and they are very good at putting in attention where they should not or not necessary to put attention. Yeah.
Yeah, may I say something tied to that? I mean, I think it's really interesting because in some sense, like you were describing the video game, people playing video games, when you say it's easy to put attention on things that we like, right? In some sense, there's no effort involved. And in the same way with video games, yes, they can play video games for a long period of time, but in an immersive environment where everything you're doing is in reaction to what is occurring, there's not a lot of intrinsic control that needs to be there in order to decide what to do. So you're in a what we'd call reactive mode, not a proactive mode. But when now you're in a position where it's some mental content or a task you don't want to deal with, you better have proactive control because you're the one that's going to decide to put the attention on there. And so in some sense, it is very important to understand that attention is not the same in all categories. And sometimes all we're doing is in a reactive mode, whether we want to be or not. And we're not actually working to cultivate more proactive, both attentional control, and proactive awareness, which I think is essentially what you described. And, if I'm going to put it on the language of cognitive neuroscience, we'd say when you're at the moment where you are reflecting and probing the nature of the mind to see that it is luminous and empty, essentially that gives you this meta awareness perspective. It's allowing you to know that there is the subject which was engaging with the object, as you said, right? But even that probing will not happen by attentional capture. It'll happen because you need proactive attentional control to say, oh, now I want to willfully look. And to be able to zoom in the way you're describing to the point where in this pixelated foam, which is nothing, took a lot of proactive control. So, in some sense, I think that it's, to me, really interesting because everything you just described about these first two stages, this is where we're at with modern science investigating attention and even contemplative practice as it relates to attention. So I'm really curious about those other three steps because what happens beyond that? And so I'll definitely have to read your full book now, but I think it's extremely fascinating. I do want to kind of push you a little bit to say more about what Dave's question was because I thought it was a great question. If there's a precondition that you can have attention without awareness, but if you have awareness, you probably have paid attention to it. What is awareness from your perspective? What is it?
Yeah.
So let's say this way. The ultimate sense of when we think about, like, for example, term Rigpa, which means orang Rik, a better word. Rigpa means seeing, knowing, being aware. Orang Rik means self-aware, self-knowing. And then question is, what is the self? So not in the West, when moment you say self-aware, most of the time, unless people who are in the Buddhism and they're reading those kind of literature, otherwise most mainstream psychologists, they will refer to self that right away to the wrong person instead of self beyond the pain identity, but say self which is identifying with condition and pain. That self immediately referred to that. So in tradition, self-awareness means knowing you are no one, but you can be anyone. So there's a two thing. You are no one. So even you say that you are no one, for some people might say, "Wow, that's wonderful." Like all these stress, tensions, I don't have to deal with it. Some sense of freedom. Another one feels you are no one, means, oh, I'm no one. That's what I've been told since childhood, and I've been suffering with all my wounds and traumas are related with not recognized. Now you're telling me to, so it's like a totally negative reaction to being no one. Instead of feeling free, feeling really more hurtful. So idea of self-awareness is really the sense of a power of being no one and ability to be anyone. And that power is true recognition of that power is where big attention, mega attention, what you can say, mega awareness, whatever you wanted to call it. And but in order to experience that, it requires all the attention to the conditions, that object. If I have a story that a person that who is I call it my famous person. That means I think about this person a lot, about what this person is doing, what that person has done, what my person is planning to do, and it takes my smile away, my sleep away. That the person, right? So if you have a people like that in your life, you have to deal with that. So your attention is, as you are saying, you are addicted to have attention to those people. You don't even take a break, even you dream about them. So how do you take a break from them? You cannot take a break from them unless you know who is putting that amount of attention, prioritizing. It's the pain does it, not the joy doesn't. Joy feels free. Joy is a little bit more crazy, like does anything, whatever comes in the moment and enjoys it. But the pain is very predictable. It focuses on only a few things and it keeps focusing on them. So that is not, there's no awareness, lack of awareness is there.
If I may say something in response to that, you brought up this idea of the self and how it relates to attention and how much our self-identity is wrapped into what we pay attention to, right? So instead of being captured by certain things in the environment, you put 5-10 people in the same context and they'll all report something different that they saw, right? So we're all biased in very different ways of what we are captured by, depending on what our past experiences are, what we've paid attention to in the past. And that determines the things that sort of pass through that attentional filter and allow us to then choose in some volitional and some in some non-volitional ways of what enters into our awareness. One of the things that that I would love to talk a little bit more about, what Amishi mentioned as sort of the fourth component that she was referring to, is this idea of this meta level of awareness, where mindfulness really gets into the conversation. Is, when we think of mindfulness as really just a level of awareness, sometimes we forget that there's this level of metacognitive processing versus non-conceptual meta awareness, and those are so different. So I can talk about in an explicit propositional way that I'm tracking what's happening in my mind. I am not paying attention right now. You can have that kind of cognitive discussion in your own head. This internal mental chatter is your reflection on what's happening, and you start to sort of reflect on your own self and how your mental habits, what are you typically paying attention to. If you just open your awareness and you start to observe it, and you can start to sort of engage with those types of thought processing in a cognitive way, or you can start to be a little bit more non-conceptual and just be aware of those thoughts that are passing. That's in there's a critical difference there in how we sort of think about what our mind is doing every day versus just being aware of it in a non-conceptual way. So I'm wondering also if maybe, Amishi, you can also talk about this, is that where does that non-conceptual sort of view of self enter into the equation of actually changing our patterns of attention? Because we know that half of our lives were spent in our heads thinking about ourselves usually in a negative way. Where there's this great study, right, by Dan Gilbert and colleagues that showed that 50% of the time we spend ruminating and thinking about what happened in the past or worrying about the future, and those types of processes are not necessarily helpful in changing how we are sort of captured by the typical stimuli in our environment, right? We want to actually change it in a more adaptive way, so we're responding instead of reacting to the world. And it seems like that. Yeah, please, because it seems like this non-conceptual
I'll just
point is
say
really
one thing, and then I would like to Amishi to speak. Is what you were saying earlier about reactive and proactive. I think. What about third category, where you don't have to be reactive or proactive? You can leave it as it is. That enjoy the moment. And whatever it is, if it's a bad weather, enjoy the bad weather. California, like people are complaining about the rain, and then last year they're complaining about the fire. So it's like always the one element is wrong. So it's not. I mean, you can have third categories, which you can be embodied. You don't have to react it or proactive. So yeah, that's all.
Yeah, no, I love that, and actually, I really, really appreciate you making that distinction. So, because I do think that's the point of departure from our conventional mind, right? When you actually are able to remain non-reactive. So the way that I describe or define, I guess, mindfulness, because we were touching on that, is it's a mental mode. So it's a way of making the mind. And modes are, different sort of, you might think of from the brain perspective as a different configuration of particular neural networks in any moment. So it's a mental mode that we could characterize by attention to present moment experience without conceptual elaboration or emotional reactivity. So in that sense, this conceptual elaboration is the key to what keeps us engaged and hooked. And when you are conceptual, self is it's the biggest of the concepts that we're holding on to. In fact, we're in a mode in which self, the concept, is driving all the other concepts, as Dave was describing. So if you can get in a mode, train your mind to access this mode, which is intrinsic to all of us, but may not be readily available for many of us in many moments. To be non-conceptual, it is that state or mode of being not proactive or reactive, but actually bathing in whatever that third thing is. And by the way, the reason I think that I find this so compelling is because we do not have this whole way of thinking about it in modern attention research and the field of cognitive neuroscience. It's like there is no word for it. And the closest you can even get to meta-awareness is what Dave was describing as metacognition. No, there are worlds apart. Metacognition is a fully conceptual evaluative mode, and meta-awareness is the non-conceptual, non-evaluative mode. So, but I think that the key is not so much to never have proactive or reactive control, but if you can intersperse proactive and reactive with more moments of this other mindful mode, what you do when you're proactive is going to be wiser, and what you do in response to where you've landed when you've been reactive is going to be wiser. So, I mean, I guess this is where, for me, it's interesting to think about these models of mind and how things work, but in the practical real world, when reaction could mean a life or death decision, or conceptual elaboration vilifies people, it really matters that we're able to step into that mindful mode. And, a lot of our work now with military leaders, not just service members of all categories, making this point very clear. It's like, you may not know that you have access to this mode, and you want to develop it because you're going to need it, because whatever you do is going to really matter for you and other people. So you have to take that observational stance of what's going on, where you're not committed to any particular action or concept.
Maybe I'll say a little bit. Sorry, so in the practices that we do, what I call it, taking 3 precious pills in the moment, a real situation in life. 3 pills are: white pill, being still in your body; red pill, being more silence in your speech; and the blue pill, being more open in your heart, in your mind. So I call it the dangerous moment, riskier moment. You take these 3 pills. It's no side effects, but it will protect you, and it will protect other people too. And I give the example, the same thing, like, when the cop stops you on the highway or for whatever reason, they say you have the right to remain silent. If you say anything, it can be or will be used against you. And most of the time in our life, every divorce happened opening up too much pain stories. So they could have not divorced many divorces as much as there if they were more aware of their speech, for example. So what I'm trying to say here is that I don't think the notion of non-conceptual awareness, it's not there in the West. So basically, not in the science, not in the psychological terms. In the Buddhism, when they talk about, even in Buddhist circle, when they talk about, it's a big debate in a philosophical, a big debate between different tenet systems about conceptual and non-conceptual. Anne Klein and me, we translated this book called Unbounded Wholeness, published by Oxford University. So whole book argument is about that. Just simple to think, conceptual and non-conceptual. What it means is, in some tradition, it would say you will understand the truth, or you will understand yourself conceptually. And according to the Dzogchen, it says it never happens. You can never know yourself fully conceptually. It will be always layers of different conditions. But then, of course, we're talking about the measuring things and so on. It's just very complicated. But it's a very, I think it's a, I was talking with Alex also, and we were talking down in Costa Rica, as I'm very fascinated about this whole notion of, I think about it every single day as a process, like the idea of how much health has today's health has to do with the pain identity, identity, what we identify. If we can address more that, even though people will not understand, many people will not understand, I can see that. But you keep talking about it a little bit more in a different way or better way, some point they will get it. The source of problem is what they're identifying with. And that is possible to change. They can shift it. So I think it's an incredible topic for both talking about, even in a war. I mean, basically wars are happening based on reacting to certain things. If they take a little moment, feeling more space, they might feel different. They might have more options. They might see a better options. Definitely, it happens all the time in our life. Every given challenging moment, just have to be more open to that moment.
Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you. So, Amishi or Dave, do you want to respond to any of that, or elaborate from your side? Or
I could say one thing about, it's one of the main mechanisms that we know that these mindfulness-based practices function, and we know that this of bringing mindful awareness to our everyday world and experience allows us to have that ability to stop, right? To stop, and instead of reacting in this way that comes from this underlying reified self, right? That is in the world, just reacting, and full of thoughts that may not be necessarily helpful. We have often set these goals that are unobtainable, of what we should look like, of what we should feel, and what we should be like. And then we have all this suffering that's inside that just continues to drive our attention in a way that's just not adaptive for us, right? But so one of the mechanisms that we often see is that by using mindfulness and meta awareness, really, we facilitate what we call decentering. And this is one of these concepts or mechanisms by which you disidentify from that thought content, and you are allowed to move into that experience of non-reactivity and inhibiting some of those natural reactions so you can then respond. It's one of the most critical mechanisms, therapeutic mechanisms in all of psychotherapy, where you can take a thought like, I'm not good enough, which is a very common thought that people have. or I am fearful. And you can put it out here and you can say, instead of saying I am a fearful person or I'm not a good enough person, Dave is just a not good enough person, because that causes the trouble of just this constant reactivity. You're looking at it as just a thought. So I am a person, Dave, who's having a thought that I'm not good enough. And you realize that is not you. And I think that it's an important point that we're realizing is so critical to the practice of mindfulness and meditation practice, where we can disidentify from that reified sense of self.
Sorry I wanted to say one thing. I remember, Dave, you're one of our first conferences in Virginia. I know I have told maybe second time or third time. I remember one of the things was your conversation there was about neuroscience point of view about the height of the mountain. So the height of the mountain, the moment you carry a heavier bag, the altitude in the height, the mountain goes higher. And so talking about the perceptual experiences. So at that time, I remember very clear, it has nothing to do with the perception. What you're seeing, it has to do with who's perceiving it. And I thought you guys were missing the point. I don't know that time somehow how the whole conversation was. I don't remember pieces of information. I remember is it was very much focused on the perception of the mountains going up and down. There was not much of discussion about the one who is seeing the mountain is going up and down. So for us, it's always more important to see who is seeing it, not what you're seeing it. What you're seeing, it doesn't matter. It matters, but matters less. So anyway, I think so that we are talking the same thing again and again. I think I'm very fascinated about this.
I have a question kind of related to this. So why, from your perspective, Rinpoche, would you say it's so difficult to access this mode of making the mind? To even do what you just said a moment ago of who is the one that is experiencing this?
Yeah, I think it's a very answer is, I think in a way it's a pretty simple answer. Our culture in general, and particularly in Western culture, is very much extroverted. It's very much materialistic. It very much viewed the value in, and people will say words like that, how much that person is worth. Something for Tibetan, we would never get that, how much somebody's worth. And so somebody's worth has to do with what amount somebody has. That we never grow up valuing like that, So when you are focused so much outside the numbers, the event and actions, not who, then I think naturally it goes to the attention outside, not inside. So I
was going to say, do you think that it was, from what you're saying, are you saying that this is the disease of a Western culture, and that in other cultural contexts, accessing this mode of being may be easier because of the lack of pressures that?
Yes. So I think it's not. I think that every humanity, they're clinging on something who you are not is the nature of samsara. That's how we are able to suffer. If you don't do that, you cannot suffer. If you're not suffering, you're not qualified to be in this samsara, right? So, but it's about degree of emphasis on that. I think it's so strong here in the West is because it's a very materialistic culture,
Yeah, but I would say even if you can't, okay, I'm not going to disagree with you at all. But what I'm wondering is, even if you have the conceptual understanding, which is an interesting way, right? You're having a conceptual understanding of non-conceptual orientation toward your moment-to-moment experience, which is it's complicated. Holding that to embody it also feels very, very unlikely to occur naturally without some training, to me. But I'm wondering if you would agree with that. I mean, are there people in your experience, is it possible to hold this non-conceptual mode without formally training the mind?
I think in some sense in our life, we all go through natural training. We train each other. Husband trains the wife trains the husband, kids training parents are training kids. We go through our suffering mode. We are forced to reflect, and we reflect. We see the value of reflecting, and we experience enough. We see the value of letting it go or resting. I think it's a natural process. But in Buddhism, there's a lot of emphasis on it. There is a very sophisticated stages of development in it, values in it, so much rich in it. But in the West, when it brings that piece of no self, be not acknowledged enough. Oh yeah, Buddhists not they talk about no self, people don't like it, but they don't see the richness and the value in there. That's what I feel, and I really think, as I said earlier, that the healing, the health, the world peace, I think there will come much more in the society if there is a little bit more understanding or a little bit effort to understand what this non-conceptual or being means, not always identify with the pain. I was just thinking today, for example, some people will be, I feel happy to make you feel happy. So I feel happy to make you feel happier. That's human experience, and you can definitely feel that. But there are some people, they don't feel that. They feel better to make you feel bad. So there's two people. One can experience feeling happy by making somebody feel happier. Other one can only feel happy making someone feel unhappy. Why? Because that's the identity. And do they have to get stuck with that identity? No. Let's talk about it. How we can figure it out. So I think that is the discussion necessary.
And I think that discussion is part of the training, as you were trying to, the way you framed it, Amishi. It's not just discussion, but it's a training of the mind to be in that space.
So there is a lot of discussion about narcissism, for example, right? Nowadays, there is a lot of discussion about the trauma. It's the perception of self. It's the same thing what we're talking, but these things are talked in Buddhism long time ago in much more depth. And people are talking only one pieces of things, which makes sense, very helpful, very nice. Yeah. People can relate to it, but then what?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, this speaks to this idea of, and I really want to hear your point of view on this too, Amishi. Like, so training attention is so critical, right? And we talk about attention and flow states as being, critical to this practice of seeing, this mind in a non-conceptual way that helps have that de-reified experience, to see our patterns of mental habits in a way that we can then distance ourselves and then respond in a more adaptive way. But I often wonder, how much is necessary for this non-dual perspective of feeling, non-self, that experience of non-self and being connected, unified with others and all things. How critical is that to this practice, this contemplative practice that we're looking to help humanity deal with all their suffering, compared to just training the attention? Because if we train the attention, we're really just, it's a skill that just helping us focus, but we're losing that sort of that key element of that non-dual, or the non-dual perspective of being connected to others, feeling connected to all the people, and not having this in-group out-group dynamic, which is, a lot of the problems in the world today are due to this fact that you could be really good at attention and concentration, but still want to harm others, or still, see yourself in a negative light, or you don't have that ability to go beyond self. So I'm just wondering where that.
I want to. I know our time is getting close to the end, but so let me just be clear about my perspective on this. I don't see. I wouldn't denigrate training attention to lead to that, because attention, like I said, is at least four things. And if you're cultivating this capacity for an expansiveness, first of all, that's great. You're not about just applying some kind of goal and doggedly pursuing it. And if you're cultivating the capacity to have the mind itself be the content area where you are able to unlock essentially that moment where you're able to have the attention to your own mind, where you're probing and prioritizing what is its nature, what is currently occurring in the present moment. You're doing, essentially, you're unlocking this non-conceptual mode. You're distancing, and I think that is also a moment of non-dual orientation. I mean, I see these as a graded development, that non-conceptual and non-dual are actually they're tied to each other. And here's the thing that I would say. So I don't see these as separate. I see that attention training, mindfulness will allow for all those aspects. And maybe you're just saying, I'm sweeping everything under attention. I don't really care what the words are, but these are the processes that I think are linked. I hope that point makes sense. So I don't think it's about dogged pursuit. That's not the intention at all. But if you don't have the capacity, this is what's really important to me. If you don't have the capacity to focus that flashlight, hold the goal, know that you're in an aware state, your ability to what you do next, because you're not going to stay in that non-conceptual, non-dual orientation. You are living in this world. You are going to be seen as a person. In your life, you cannot operate with that perspective. It can inform many aspects of the decisions you make, but you're not going to operate from that particular mental mode. If you cannot direct your attention with clarity and precision, what you do next after coming out of that non-conceptual mode is going to be more flawed. So I do think that it's not just about cultivating a capacity to be non-dual and non-conceptual. It is important to cultivate really what shamatha practice, I think, is trying to do, which is you're better able to do that directed focus. And let me just make one more comment, because it's actually tied to what Rinpoche said, in the West and where we are in the West with regard to these things. Part of the bad or misunderstanding, I think, that a lot of people are having regarding Buddhist practice, especially with regard to no self, is what I just said. It's like, oh no, I don't want to do no self because I got to go and make money and I've got to be competitive, and there is a war and I do have to make sure that I don't let the bad guys win, and I have limited resources. It feels like a violation of being able to function in the real world to think about no self. And so one of my missions actually in bringing these practices to groups that have more of that view and are living in the real demands of that is to let them know that you want to think of the non-conceptual, non-dual modes as sort of a resting spot. And even in the book, my title of my book, Peak Mind, there's so many layers to that. In some sense, it's like you want to be the best you can be. You want to be at the peak of your functioning. But when I think of peak mind, it's a mind that is at the top of some kind of plateau and overlooks to see what is going on. It's a resting place. And from that resting place, you can make better decisions. You can take more appropriate action. It's not the be-all, end-all, where you're just going to stay observational and no self, but it's going to inform what you do, and it's going to weave into everything else in your life. Then it feels less threatening to people, and they understand better, especially as a leader, I better be able to see what's actually happening before I take action.
The question to Amishi, question for you. When you talking about to frontline in the war situations like that, if you think about the war, there are leaders, there are political groups, there are special interests, but there are humanity. Mm-hmm. So it's not like a mother who is dying from Russian side, or like in the case of Ukraine, or in the Ukrainian side, a child who is getting lost from the either side. These are humanity. So suffering of humanity, how you were trying to bring something on these principles on one side, or do you?
What do you mean by one side?
One side means if you are, I don't know, if you are working, if you are, when you say defense, Alex,
the Department of Defense.
Yeah.
Right. I think what Rinpoche is trying to say is that, they're all humans. And of course, you're training one, but how do you train them to also have these aspects of humanity that are part of it, right?
This is exactly what I mean. This is the point. This is the point. Whatever the pressures of being in these high demand situations, like a war zone, do to our mind, we're more likely to be self-focused, protected, reactive, and those reactions and self-focus can be devastating to what you're trying to do. So if you cultivate the capacity to be on that ledge that can stay non-conceptual and non-dual, even for a small period of time, the next thing you do is more likely to be more thoughtful and not driven by those automatic tendencies of mind. And in fact, what the service members and leaders say is that makes them appreciate the common humanity that we have. Yeah. Oh, that boy, he could be my boy. You know, that woman could be my wife. Like, they see aspects that they were blocked out from because they never had the moment to actually see what was actually happening around them without that funnel. And by the way, if I could train every military in the world and offer them these practices, I think that would be something we would be able to do. It won't matter because most militaries are working at the command of the societies that drive decisions. So this is not something that is to the military itself. This has to be with the political will of the countries that are making these choices. So now we're talking about exactly your mission of bringing this to as many people as possible, so that we are really enacting the conditions for peace, because that peace is going to come from these micro moments of seeing what is in this non-constricted manner.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. I love that, Amishi, that, you know, that, and as Rinpoche was saying, you know, the training, right? This is a training. I mean, and you start with the flashlight, you go to the floodlight, and then you go up to this non-conceptual. And I love that, as you said, that when you are in that state, and Rinpoche emphasizes rest, right? Rest with awareness, not rest with snoring, right? So, and this rest with awareness is what allows us to get into our inner qualities, right? Like loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. So thank you for all the work you all do. I think, and maybe you agree, since we are at the end of time for this, that we should have another one. I mean, this was so awesome. I want to thank each of you. I want to thank the team, because there's a lot of people that we don't see that help make this possible, like Milos, like Poli, like so many others, like Mariela in the chat. I know there were so many questions in the chat that I couldn't get to because this was such a rich dialogue. So thank you for your questions. I hope the dialogue did respond to many of those. And before I conclude, I do want to say again, tomorrow you have an opportunity to see Rinpoche again in Cyber Sangha, realizing your full potential, manifesting qualities that benefit others. And also, I want to say a little bit about what's coming next. So after Losar, next week, we have Tibetan New Year. And so we shift from what we've been doing in body, speech, and mind to different, actually connecting to different emotions. And how do we work with those? So the first one that we will be discussing about is depression. And for that, which will be on March 16th, also at noon Eastern time, it's going to be Sindel Siegel. I know some of you know him well. And with him, Pastor Juanita Rasmus. And she comes from both the pastor from the African American community and also from the area of her own suffering with depression and overcoming in her book, Learning to Be. So I look forward to that. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Amishi. Thanks, Rinpoche, as always. And thank the whole team. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Cyber Sangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.